So guys, today we are going to do the fourth pillar of ESP, right? We are already done with the three. We have done needs analysis, which is related to the needs of the learners, instructors, and administrators. Primarily learners, okay? But in this process of needs analysis, we also take into consideration the needs of maybe the administrator, and when administrator is conducting needs analysis, we read that he takes into consideration the needs of the instructors also. Then we talked about learning objectives, what might be the learning objectives based on which you are going to design your syllabus. Okay, so learning objective is one of the most important pillars because based on these objectives, you actually design everything around it. Okay, and then whatever you design comes in as the third pillar, materials and methods, right? So based on those objectives, you actually through three processes, maybe through adoption, and creation of new material, we have done all of that in detail, right? And then the fourth one is that we are going to start today with chapter number 7 is evaluation. Okay, so we lost the page here. Let's go to chapter 7. Okay, the screen is being shared, so you must be looking at the screen. We are trying to go to chapter 7. Okay, so chapter 7 is about evaluating. Basically, we will be talking about the fourth pillar, which is evaluation. So as the first pillar is needs analysis, and it needs analysis is just not the needs analysis of the learners. Similarly, evaluation as the fourth pillar of ESP is just not evaluation of the course. Okay, so we would be talking about evaluation of learners, instructors, and courses. The whole program may be in ESP, right? Now, basically, what we gather from evaluating is, and why do we evaluate anything? As far as ESP is concerned, the evaluation basically starts with the course. Okay, so with the course and with the learners, right? Now, why do we evaluate? Maybe the learner, instructor, or the course. We evaluate in order to check if the teaching is effective, okay, and if the learners are progressing, right? And in case the teaching is not effective or the learners are not progressing, then we need to check a lot of things. We need to reevaluate a lot of things. We need to reevaluate the material which we have taken to the classroom. We need to evaluate the method through which we are teaching the students. We need to see if the students are not making progress. What's wrong? Where we are not doing things right. Okay, so that's why evaluation is done at different levels and in different areas. Okay, now the general meaning that we take of this evaluation, when we talk about evaluation, so the first thing comes to mind is evaluating the students. Okay, so we are going to start it with a reflection, and we are going to look at how evaluation or tests, maybe end term test or any kind of exams, are looked at by the students, and how do teachers feel about evaluating the students on these tests. Okay, and then we would see how valid are these evaluations, okay, and how these tests, exams, assessments can prove to be effective in the overall performance of the test or otherwise, right? So let's talk about what is the opening reflection, and we are going to reflect on it together. You would reflect on this as students, and I would reflect on this as a teacher. Okay. So it is common for learners in both EAP and EOP settings to take some kind of formalized test at the end of the course. From a learner's perspective, what do you think is the primary aim of such tests? If you are a student, do you like these tests? Why or why not? From an instructor's perspective, what do you think is the primary aim of an end of course test? If you have experience teaching, do you like conducting these tests? Again, why or why not? Okay. So based on your answers, how might the design of a test impact positively and or negatively on the learners, instructors, and course as a whole? Okay. Now the first thing is usually any kind of test. Okay. Even if I tell you now that I'll credit you for your class participation, um, that also becomes stressful. Okay. As soon as you come to know that you would be judged, you would be credited, you would be compared, uh, the situation becomes stressful. Okay. So most of the time it happens that students do not really like these tests. Okay. But these are important because uh, there isn't any other way to promote them to the next semester, to the next grade, to give them degrees. This has been the formula since we start with this education, right? So there has to be some tests so that the knowledge may be evaluated, whether the students have learned something properly or up to the mark, and they could be given degrees, or they could be given some certificates, or maybe they're promoted to the next level, right? So the test and evaluation stays important. uh, but how do students feel about it? Usually students feel a little stressed, okay, and they have a number of worries related to these tests or assessments. Okay, they are worried about their performance, they are worried about the result, they are even worried about how they would be evaluated, right? So that this stress and these worries might um, act as obstacle in learning, right? So while we talk as teachers, when we talk about end term assessments or end term test or examination, midterm or final, or when we have taught a certain part of the syllabus or the whole syllabus and then we put the students to test, now that happens to be a burden on the instructors also, because test is itself making and creating these tests is time consuming. Okay, grading these tests again is time consuming, right? And then conducting these tests with our scenario in mind, lots of students in a single class, you must have seen and experienced what happens when it is midterm or final term. With our limited resources, we try to manage these exams perfectly well, but uh, in reality it becomes really difficult to manage. You have seen that some people are shifted in the corridors, okay, and still there are a lot of students, the space is less, and then it happens to be a monetary burden on the university or any of the institute which is conducting these tests, right? And because of these problems, the fairness of these tests becomes a question. Okay, how fair are these tests? And then validity, of course, remains another issue. We are going to do this validity in detail in a while, but for now, what we are reflecting on, why are these tests conducted, and especially year-end test, or if it's an annual system, or term test if it's a semester system. So basically, it's not a very encouraging or a happy process for both uh, the people who are taking these tests and the people who are conducting these tests, right? Another thing, on the part of the instructor, uh, these tests might not exactly and accurately measure the performance of the students, okay? Because if, for instance, in the annual system, where the performance of the students is evaluated and the student is judged only on a test of 3 hours, so that does not in any way accurately measures the performance of the student, right? Anything can happen on the day of exam. The student might fall sick, okay? He might not be well prepared, whereas he was working hard throughout the year. Some other untoward circumstances may arise because of which the student is unable to perform, especially on that particular day, which is set for exam, and there is just one exam and it's over and done. So as far as this evaluation is concerned, there are a lot of concerns and there are a lot of questions about it. So when the student should be evaluated and how should they be evaluated? We are not specifically right now talking about EAP or EOPSP. We're talking about generally about testing, but this is also applicable in EAP and EOP classes. A little differently, but of course, psychologically, tests act the same, whatever test or exams, assessments they are, right? So you can have your own reflections on this, and I'm really interested that you think about it. How do you see these tests as students? We can talk about it later on. I'll take your reflections as well. You can give your reflections in writing, right? But for now, we need to move on and we need to understand evaluation in ESP. And to understand this evaluation, we need to look at three terms. We need to differentiate between three very similar terms. Okay, someone's mic is on. Amen, please mute yourself. Okay, Amen has given something in the chat. They can identify knowledge gaps. Yeah, it may result in failure and uncertainty, and it may demotivate the students in some way, right? But one thing which is common, some students would be motivated who are performing well, some students would be demotivated who are unable to perform well on the day of the test. But what is common among all students, whether good students, average students, above average students, test in itself is a stressful process. That is common, no matter how wonderful the student is. But the test day, test time, its preparation, anything, the feeling that is associated with tests, exams, assessments, evaluation, being judged, is all stressful. Okay, so I'm really interested in getting your reflections on the topic, but for now, we need to move on. Yes, Faz has put a question. Effective learning hypothesis. Yes, effective learning hypothesis is basically the fear that we might not be able to learn. Okay, so yes, kind of, maybe, students might not learn because they know that they would be evaluated. The fear does not let them learn. This may also happen. So the modern schooling system does not conduct these exams for the little kids. Okay, they keep on getting promoted without being evaluated, without exams, in the sense that term end exam is not there. They will not be given a date sheet, and they will not be asked to come for the specific paper. They're um, probably casually, informally being assessed throughout uh, their time in the classrooms, right? So this is the reason in the modern system evaluation is discouraged, because when the students know that they would not be judged, uh, the chances are that they would learn better. Okay, so um, learning would come, automatically, easily, casually, and in a friendly environment, when they know that they would not be compared with their class fellows who's doing better. Oh, okay, who has performed better on the test on a particular day. So they would be learning every day something, and they know that they would not be questioned about it. I mean, they would not be put to any kind of test, right? Okay, so moving on to three terms that are related to evaluation. We have tests, okay, then we have assessments, and then we have evaluation. Now, tests is simply defined as the performance measure, where the performance of a student is measured. For instance, I can tell you that you have a test tomorrow, so your performance would be measured on that particular day in that particular test. Okay, and when we say that um, you will have a test, or you had a test, or you are having a test, so the performance measure is of that particular test. The instructor or the examiner teacher is not concerned with your performance otherwise in the class. Okay, so test is a very narrow kind of term as far as evaluation is concerned. Okay, then comes the assessment. Now, assessment is taken as a process, right? Test is not a process. It is just done. It's a kind of a product. Okay. Assessment is a process in which we keep on collecting uh, data about the student's performance. We analyze it, and we use this data to understand the progress of the student. Okay, how is he progressing through performance, right? So assessment is a more general kind of a term. It refers to a complete process, right? And assessment is not only done through a test, right? So assessment can be done through observation, through other ways and means also, right? So basically, in a semester system, you are being assessed. Okay, you're just not marked for one thing, you're marked for a number of things. Your marking is divided, so you are being assessed. You are in a process of evaluation. So assessment is a process of evaluation, while test is a measure of performance. Okay, so the test has to be a written test or an oral test or some kind of a test within a specific time limit. Okay, but assessment may go on throughout the semester, throughout the course period, whatever it might be, and it is not only done through testing. Okay, observation can one of the ways of assessment. If a questionnaire is given to the student to fill about their own performance improvement or otherwise, so that is also assessment. You are assessing the students through providing them a questionnaire, right? So this is the difference between test and assessment. We would go to defining evaluation also, but let's talk about um, this test-based assessments can be, of two kinds. One is objective and the other is subjective. Now, the objective tests or objective uh, test-based assessment, these are not influenced by the feeling of the grader. Okay. For instance, if you are given a multiple choice question or true and false question, so the answer can either be true or false. I cannot mark you correct or incorrect based on my personal opinion. There is one answer which is correct. If you have marked it correct, I cannot say it's wrong. And if it's incorrect, I cannot say it's right. So my personal opinions and would not affect the grades. Okay, so my personal feelings or my maybe anything that is subjective related to person's feeling or person's judgment, person's opinion, will not influence the grades of the student, right? So such tests are called as the objective tests, right? Or the objective test-based assessment. The other one is the subjective test. Now, these subjective tests are or might be influenced by the opinion, feelings, experience, knowledge of the grader, of the teacher, or the instructor, or examiner, whoever is grading you. So, subjective tests are basically detailed kind of tests. Okay, and subjective tests do not have one correct answer, like objective tests have just one correct answer. That's why these are not influenced by the feelings of the grader, but subjective tests are detailed kind of tests, and they include short or longer answers, right? And they might have some opinionated questions. Students would be providing different answers to a single question in a subjective test, which is in the case when the test is objective, right? Now, what are the purposes of assessment or the types of assessments? So, when we talk about assessment, there are basically three kinds, right? And these three kinds are based on the purpose. What might be the purpose of assessment, and according to the purpose of assessment, these are the three kinds of assessment that we are going to do. Okay, so there can be diagnostic assessment with a purpose of diagnosing the strengths and weaknesses of the learners. Okay, how these diagnostic tests are made or how these diagnostic assessments are conducted, we are going to look at it in detail. And much of the time, these diagnostic tests, since their function is diagnosing, or through identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the learners. So these diagnostic assessment tests or diagnostic assessments are conducted at the beginning of the course. Okay. So now these diagnostic tests, of course, when we are talking about ESP and then based on the needs of the students, language based on the needs of the students, so we would be looking at the gaps, okay, that the students have in the target area. Okay, we don't say in the target language because we are not teaching ESP students the whole language as a whole. We are teaching them what is their requirement as far as the language is concerned, right? Next is the formative assessments. Now, formative assessment, the purpose of formative assessment is to measure the progress. Okay, so diagnostic assessment is conducted before you take the students in, before the students intake. Okay, and formative assessment is done during the process of teaching and learning, right? So in this formative assessment, we measure the degree of progress, improvement, or otherwise. So formative assessment again is just not one time assessment, but it basically related to the degree of progress or the improvement. Okay. So with this formative assessment, the instructor has the opportunity to make changes, maybe in the material, maybe in the teaching methodology, or whichever area needs some changes, he can do that in order to improve the progress of the students. Okay. Now, summative kind of assessment is the overall assessment, right? And in this summative assessment, we try to know whether the progress is adequate. Okay. See, formative assessment would tell you that the student is progressing, but you need to check whether that progress is adequate, that progress is sufficient. If the student is making progress, but that is inadequate, you know, he isn't making the progress at the pace he should, right? Because for every course you have a limited duration of time, so you cannot be very flexible with the progress of the student. So at certain point in the semester or the course, the student should have attained certain level of target proficiency. Okay, while we are talking about language teaching. So summative uh, assessments actually looks at the quality and the adequacy, sufficiency of the progress in the target area. Okay, so formative only looks at the progress or otherwise, but there has to be sufficient, adequate progress in a particular course. Just not because of the time limitations, but because of many other factors. Okay. And as far as ESP is concerned, we already know that the time duration is short for these courses. And then we have to target some particular areas, and we want our students to be successful, to have made improvements for which they are undertaking these courses. Okay, so the session is about to end, and I would like you to reconnect within the next 5 minutes. I'm ending the meeting here. Okay, we'll meet again We will reconnect.